So let's get on with our talk. We've got Matt Kilkenny. Matt holds degrees from San Jose State University and has a Deming Scholars MBA from Fordham University in New York. He's a Bay Area native and has spent his career in engineering and management roles, but grew up playing cops and robbers in his dad, who is also here, in his dad's Packard's parts cars. He's also restored Packards with his dad. He enjoys researching automotive history of the classic car era. He's also a judge for the Packard Open class at Pebble Beach, and is a member, what was that? And is member of the Classic Car Club of America, the Packard Club, and the Society of Automotive Historians. So please welcome Matt Kilkenny.
Good afternoon. First, excited to be here. I met Steve at a classic car event late last year and just started talking cars. And you've done this before. Happy to be here. Really excited to talk about my book, which was a lot of effort, and I hope you walk away with a little more information about this piece of history and the automotive world. Writing a book is like restoring an old car. Always wanted to write a book. Never found the time to do it, but the pandemic ended up being the opportunity to do so. Spent a lot of time with my dad going to events at Hershey, back in Detroit, going to Detroit Public Library. We started collecting all this information, and you really just start connecting the dots and say, hey, maybe there's a story here. And the pandemic really is what did it for me. I was at home like everybody else, staring at a wall, and always wanted to write a book, and I had all this material and just started writing a book. So it's like an old car, because when you start, you're all excited. Great project, you get into it, everything's everywhere, like restoring an old car. Halfway through, you're thinking, what the heck did I get into? Is this thing ever going to come together? But eventually you persevere, like restoring an old car, you get it done, and then you get all the nice compliments from people that read the book, and it makes it all worthwhile, just like restoring an old car. So this book really is about the beginning history of automobile styling in Detroit, maybe all of automotive world. It's based off of the core transcripts from Ray Dietrich back in 1964 that he discovered at Western Michigan University. That was probably the impetus for me to finally say, hey, I never seen this interview. He's got a lot of good insight I've never read anywhere. That ended up being the backbone, I think, for my book, because he's referenced quite a bit. Just a little bit about me. Steve mentioned it. This is a picture of my dad's backyard, where I grew up and played on the Packard parts car in the side yard. My dad is where I got the car bug. He started off with Model Ts, driving around when he was 13 on his parents' property. Eventually moved to Model A's, T-Birds, Mustangs, and then eventually he moved on to Packards, and you can see some of the cars here that were in our side yard, and that's kind of how I got indoctrinated into this hobby. Of course, I wanted to play baseball when I was a kid. I wasn't that interested in the cars, but eventually your baseball career peters out, and you need another hobby to keep you busy, and I did actually like the old cars. This here is kind of exciting. I have this picture in my book. This is when I met Ray Dietrich when I was a little kid. There was a car show down in Santa Clara in 1979, and Ray Dietrich was there in an RV. And my dad said, hey, you're going to meet somebody pretty important. And so I was about 9 years old at the time. We were both able to, he was doing most of the talking, to meet Ray Dietrich. And luckily enough, we got an autograph from Ray Dietrich, which I put in my book because I'm pretty proud of it. You know, who thought a little kid who met Ray Dietrich would someday write an award-winning book revolving around his career? So if you really boil down the main theme of my book, it really is this. Styling is a given today for selling cars. How did that come to be? It's very, I have almost 700 footnotes in my book, so it's a lot of digging, sometimes dead ends, a lot of times found good information that led to connecting more dots and making a more interesting story. It's really about the pioneering artists of the automotive industry who made styling an important selling point. They're really the avant-garde of the automotive industry. In the early days of the automobile, the focus was on making the car reliable. Styling took a back seat. Harley Earl, which I do mention in the book, he from GM, he was definitely a pioneer and important player in automotive design. But as I discovered in my research, I found out there were other people involved in Detroit earlier than Harley Earl that really brought styling into Detroit. Fashion and style were centered in New York, and the styling of automobiles was no different back at close to the turn of the century. It really was the vision of Edsel Ford and his use of Ray Dietrich to get the center of American automotive styling to move from New York to Detroit. I relied as much as I could on first-person accounts, but like I mentioned, the backbone of the book revolved around Ray Dietrich and the transcript of Western Michigan University Oral History Project in 1964. So the main questions for this book really were, when did the styling inflection point start in the industry, and who were the key people and events that drove this innovation? This book really is an homage to all the early designers, sung and unsung, who helped pioneer styling to be an important selling point for selling cars. This here is a picture of the Mechanics Institute in New York, back near the turn of the century. The gentleman you see close to the board towards the right, that's Andrew Johnson. Andrew Johnson is really considered the father of automobile design. He taught at the Mechanics Institute the carriage drafting program for about 20 years before they closed the program down. And then he ended up doing a home-based studies program with people who still wanted to study automobile design. He taught the French rule, which came from the shipping industry, which was used to define the shape of the hull of a ship. And it ended up turning into a way to define the shape of an automobile. So if you think about it, when you have a drawing, it's 2D, how do you sew a shape in a three-dimensional drawing that people can interpret to build, whether it's a ship or a car? And by using this French rule with these keys and numeric tables, you can understand what the actual shape of the car is that the designer intended. Andrew Johnson stressed the arts as well as the sciences by interlacing lectures with quotes from Shakespeare and poets, as well as objects of fine art for good design. A Who's Who alumni dinner held in his honor in the late 1930s. One designer said, we learned the automobile design, everybody learned from him. In appreciation, the Fisher brothers from GM gave him a new car. He never drove the car because he never learned how to drive a car. So if you think about it, the father of automobile design never knew how to drive a car. And even though he was a rich man, he kept the car until his death because he didn't have the heart to sell it. Ray Dietrich one time asked Andrew Johnson why he appeared to be more critical of his work than the other students. Johnson said, your work can be criticized, but the others cannot, which really is another way of saying you have a lot of potential, a lot of these students don't have potential. Here's a picture of Ray Dietrich with Franklin. So he studied under Andrew Johnson in the Mechanics Institute program from 1915 to 1918. And he had to be sponsored because, so he ended up being hired at Brewster in 1915, who sponsored him going through this particular program. Brewster in New York was known as the finest carriage builder in the horse and buggy days in the United States, if not the world, based on my research. Like a lot of carriage builders, they transitioned to automobile body manufacturing. So Dietrich was getting a great education by studying under the father of car design and working at one of the finest coach builders during that time. This here is Tom Hibbert. He was at Brewster briefly when Ray Dietrich was at Brewster. They became good friends, and he started off as an apprentice at Roubaix and Company in Cleveland a few years earlier. That's where he kind of learned how to be a designer. So they became friends at Brewster. He was another pioneering steel artist that really, and started LeBaron Coach Building with Ray Dietrich on 2 Columbus Circle in New York City. He left LeBaron in 1923 and was involved in a Minerva dealership in Paris and opened the Hibbert and Darren firm in Paris shortly after. He stayed in Europe more because he felt there was more design freedom on custom cars. And if you think about a lot of the high-end cars back in those days, the manufacturers just sold the chassis and they relied on custom bodybuilders to build the bodies. So he felt maybe the market was much larger than it was in America at the time. After the Depression, he returned to work with Harley Earl on Cadillacs during the Depression, before ending up at Ford in design in the 40s and late 40s. Interesting note about Tom Hibbert, which I discovered, he's ended up his career at a wheel manufacturer, Kelly Hayes, and he had a lot of patents at Kelly Hayes. And actually one of the patents was for the design of the wheel on the 67 Mustang Shelby GT 350. I remember seeing it, I'm like, okay, well, we got one of these old-time classic designers classing up a muscle car. So everybody knows probably these people here. We got Charlie Chaplin with Henry Ford and Edsel Ford. Henry Ford had zero interest in style and didn't want anyone tinkering with the Model T. Edsel Ford was the opposite of his father. He loved the arts, took painting classes, and an appreciation for style and good design. Lincoln was bought for Edsel really in 1922, and I think it was really to get Edsel away from what was going on at Ford. But this was the opportunity that Edsel needed to eventually bring good body design into Ford, which I talk about in the book. In the early 20s, Edsel felt that styling had become an important selling point, and in many respects due to the increased market share of closed cars, which women preferred, and the women were more interested in the styling by the mid-20s than maybe the men were, based on some research was done at the time. So Edsel really saw the vision of styling taking over in the 20s as being a selling point for cars. I just want to mention here, just briefly, this is a picture by a photographer named Irving Browning. It'll become a little bit more apparent as I go through this, why that is interesting. This here is another Irving Browning picture. This is actually to Columbus Circle back in 1925. I got lucky and found this picture. On the 5th floor of this building, on this side of the building, was a LeBaron, and they were in the windows. So I was pretty shocked to find this picture when I was doing research. From 1925, LeBaron would have been there. They talked it, when they founded it, Hibbert and Dietrich talked to each other at lunchtime, and about what the industry needed in terms of architects. And that was the idea of LeBaron, is turning it into an architectural firm for the automobile, which they thought was kind of innovative. Dietrich would sit across the street in Central Park on the bench, work through his problems. It's kind of interesting because I went to Fordham University, the graduate program, and I used to sit in that same area near Columbus Circle. Edsel Ford would frequently stop by and discuss design at LeBaron. He frequently would more go to Ray Dietrich than Tom Hibbert, and I don't think it's because he necessarily preferred Ray Dietrich's talents. I think it was more, Ray Dietrich was a more outgoing person and Tom Hibbert was much more reserved. So I think he felt a little more comfortable talking to Ray Dietrich. And of course, Tom Hibbert wasn't at LeBaron too long before he left. So this is illustration 61 in my book. Again, this is another Irving Browning photo, and there's a good story about this that I'll end my talk with. This is Ralph Roberts. He's really the third leg of the original founding of LeBaron. He became friends with Hibbert when growing up in Cleveland while Hibbert was working at Roubaix. He joined LeBaron after he graduated from college as a bookkeeper and office manager. So he wasn't really a designer when he started out. In early 1925, Edsel Ford tried to convince Roberts and Dietrich to partner with the Murray Body Corporation to move LeBaron to Detroit. Roberts did not want to move to Detroit. He loved New York, and he claimed that the LeBaron team at the time did not want to move either. And I talk about in that book that Ray Dietrich really wanted to move LeBaron. He thought it was a great opportunity for LeBaron to get big and be part of the growing automotive industry, because the talent that LeBaron brought to the table didn't exist in Detroit. And that ended up leading to sort of a falling out. And Ray Dietrich left LeBaron in 1925 to go to Detroit, start Dietrich Inc. And it's interesting. He sold in 25, and Roberts didn't want to sell, but by 1927, Roberts sold LeBaron to the Briggs Manufacturing, which is a bodybuilder in Detroit, for a lot of money. So actually, Ray Dietrich, even though he's really the core of LeBaron, didn't make any money on the sale of LeBaron when they finally were sold in 27. Dietrich and Roberts at Murray were now in high demand by the late 20s because the importance of styling was playing in selling cars. Briggs and Murray were the largest bodybuilding companies competing to win these talents, since they were still relying upon body design for auto manufacturers. So with these leading custom and semi-custom designs that were coming out of Dietrich and LeBaron, the idea with Briggs and Murray partnering up with LeBaron and Dietrich was, how do we get these design ideas that these talented guys have and bring them into the production cars and the production bodies that that Briggs and Murray Corporation were building for the Fords of the world. That's where the market share was. That was where the big interest was. How do we get these design talents that maybe are more leading for the semi-custom and custom cars to eventually trickle down into the production cars, because that's where the money was from the bodybuilder standpoint. And there was a lot of animosity between Roberts and Dietrich when Dietrich left, because Roberts wasn't a designer. So Tom Hibbert and Ray Dietrich left, and they were really the core of LeBaron, and Roberts wasn't really a designer. He ended up having a good sense of style and design, but he learned that just working with Dietrich after Tom Hibbert left, and became kind of a stylist leader himself. This is an illustration I have in my book. It just describes what a semi-custom body is. A custom body obviously is a one-off body built for one particular customer. The idea with the semi-custom is, right, if you have this low volume of production bodies, you can bring the cost down because you could have tools and fixturing for some parts of the car, so you can bring the cost down and reach a bigger market. That's really the end concept of it. So, right, so just going through from left to right down to the bottom, right, you have the auto manufacturer sitting down with maybe a LeBaron or Dietrich coming up with designs. They chalk it out on the chalkboard, which is what they did back then. Number 3 is, right, they're taking measurements off that overall design, usually full scale, developing drawings, and also having some influence on how can we save some money by having it be a little more of a production type car versus a semi-custom to bring the cost down, right? And then obviously the last one is these parts are used to build maybe 10 to 20 of these or what have you, a small portion of small volume of automobiles of this design. This here, this was one of the cars. This is actually the original design by Ray Dietrich to get Packard interested to partner with Ray Dietrich so that Dietrich Inc. could be featured in the sales brochure catalog at Packard. Originally, Ray Dietrich approached Packard, asked them, hey, I'd really like to partner with you, put my designs in your sales brochure, and Packard was not interested. I don't know if it was ego or what have you, but Ray Dietrich didn't give up. He basically bought a few chassis. This is one of the designs he had. He claims he cut the springs on this car so it sits lower, and he had a salesman take these cars around to hotels at major cities to try and gather interest from the public in these designs. And what ended up happening was Packard ended up getting hundreds of chassis orders to be delivered to Dietrich Inc. And that raised Packard. They said, what's going on over there? And they visited him. And at that point, Packard said, okay, we will partner with you, which they did for a number of years, being a featured mark in Packard sales brochures, Dietrich. This is a 31 LeBaron. Just an example of some of the great pictures I have in my book. I'll talk a little bit about some of the photographers I used that probably some of you already know. The early 20s were an inflection point for styling, with the people I talked to being the innovators. Again, independent bodybuilders such as Briggs and the Murray Corporation, to keep automakers' business, were first to offer body design services to the manufacturers, and they filled a vacuum. By the 1930s, styling as a selling point was there to stay, and the steel artists became mainstream as most auto manufacturers themselves now had their own design studios. Besides the larger picture on the early history of styling, I believe my book has the most comprehensive accounts of the history of some of the most important coach builders of LeBaron and Dietrich. Very proud of that. Edsel Ford, Ray Dietrich, and it was really Edsel Ford's vision, as I explained here. Ray Dietrich, Tom Avery, Ralph Roberts, to a certain extent also, were some of the most important people for making styling an important selling point in Detroit. Edsel Ford wanted Detroit to become more known or beyond just the Model T, but wanted to become also its own styling centric mecca, similar to Paris or London or what have you. Here's a 32 Packard V windshield Dietrich sport thing. Another picture out of my book. Ray Dietrich hit his artistic zenith with his designs on cars like this, the 32 V windshield Packard, just as the Depression kicked in and his career crashed. So it's quite amazing that the period and the cars he's most well known for, when these cars were actually being sold, was probably the lowest point of his career. He got a fabulous salary and was able to consult on the side when things were well before the Depression. However, he was never able to get an equal interest in his own company, which I talk about in my book, Dietrich Inc., and that partly led to his demise and leaving Dietrich Inc. as a company. But it was also the Depression and these big expensive cars, the market share just shrunk. So when you add all this up, and to add more to the downtrodden story, Ray Dietrich was also going through a divorce in about 1932 when cars like this were coming out, and that were played out in the papers in Detroit. So his career, his output from his career was at a high just a few earlier, and now he was really at rock bottom. Here's just another Dietrich Packard 32 Dietrich convertible Victoria. This is Walter Chrysler. With no prospects, Ray Dietrich in 1932 was eating a cheese sandwich and having a beer at the New York Athletic Club when Walter Chrysler stopped by to say hello. Walter Chrysler was a big fan of Ray Dietrich's. Walter Chrysler covertly brought Ray Dietrich in to head design at Chrysler. About 1932 is when he got in. He didn't really take over design until like 33, 34 because of politics at Chrysler. but he did really set up the formal Chrysler Design Studios, the original, quite frankly, in about 34 to 1938, when he resigned because at that time Walter Chrysler, who was really defending the Ray Dietrich from from the politics within Chrysler, which I talk about in my book. So when Walter Chrysler had his heart attack in 1938, Ray Dietrich saw the writing on the wall. Instead of waiting to be fired, he just quit Chrysler. And you may be asking, why covertly was Ray Dietrich brought into Chrysler when Walter Chrysler, it was his company? My book goes into the details on that. It's quite an interesting story. Here's a 32 Chrysler Imperial Speedster by LeBaron, another picture in my book, just to give you an idea of some of the images and some of the great photographers that were nice enough to let me use some of their photos. This here, I found this picture. This is the GM Art and Color Studio of the late 1920s. This gentleman near the front, Ledyard Toole, he was an impressionist painter. Quite an interesting story how he played into Alfred Sloan's idea to develop the Art and Color Studio within GM. A lot of people think it was clear only Harley Earl who developed and triggered the idea with Alfred Sloan to develop the Art and Color Studio in GM. But I learned through my research that this gentleman also played a part. Being an impressionist painter, he actually went to the proving grounds at GM, and there was a bunch of Chevys with different colors on them. And because he's an impressionist painter, he painted them all in different colors. And then he asked all the executives there, including Alfred Sloan, what the differences are between the cars, if there were differences. And they all said they do look different. Either they look shorter or look longer. And that was the point Ledyard was trying to make, is that when you use paint and colors, you can change perception of the overall design of the car, dimensions of the car. And based on my research, it was at that point that Alfred Sloan, it kind of hit him that they needed to develop an art and color studio within GM. And of course, Harley Earl ran it. But this gentleman played a piece in GM, developing that informal studio. And in the back, there's John DeHarda, who worked at GM for a few years in the art and color studio. Just to have a little bit of history from designer Reese Miller here. This is a cool picture of him at Chrysler in 1936, I believe it was, when he was working under Ray Dietrich doing design at Chrysler. Reason why I mention him is I mentioned him in the book because through interviews, he had good documented perspective because he worked for Harley Earl at GM for a while, and then he worked for Ray Dietrich at Chrysler, and then later he worked at LeBaron with Ralph Roberts. And he gives a little perspective on the different cultures in the different design studios. You're probably asking, what's this all about? Yeah, well, this here, fast forwarding to the early 1960s, Ray Dietrich, who was in Kalamazoo, Michigan, he went to like a Lions Club event or something, and Ted McCarty, who ran Gibson Guitar, recognized him and was a big fan of Dietrich's design. He says, hey, we're trying to design a guitar for what he called this new way out music, which was, of course, rock and roll. And so basically what Ray Dietrich did, which was normal for Ray Dietrich, he would listen to the TV thinking about design problems. In this case, he did that. And this is one of the designs that he actually came up with that Ted McCarty, who ran Gibson Guitar, liked. And that ended up being the Firebird guitar. I understand he's Eric Clapton and Paul McCartney used this instrument, and McCartney played it on his hit song, Maybe I'm Amazed. He also designed the Gibson Thunderbird guitar and a few other things for Gibson, just as a kind of industrial designer. Now let's just talk a little bit about the book itself. Some of the interesting stories about writing the book and challenges that maybe you find interesting. Paul Weiser was my editor, and what was great about him was he was not a car enthusiast. And what was great about that is he asked such great questions because he didn't know, and it really helped clarify the text, which made the story better. He was tough love. He was innately curious, and I can't stress how important it is to have a really good editor you could work with. He also had a great sense of humor. He would say, "The Great Depression, what was so great about it?" Or he'd say, "Too many commas. I'm going to kamikaze the sentence." So he made it really light, and it made it all the hours I spent with him reviewing and cleaning up the text. He was just great. He was also a University of California book editor, so he did academic books. And he told me near the end that he felt my book was one of the most researched books he had seen in his over 40 years of editing. That was quite a compliment. I decided to self-publish and use a hybrid publishing company called Beavers Pond Press, who helped me through the process to publish. One of the biggest reasons I decided to self-publish is I didn't want to lose control of the content. I figured if I did sell it, they're going to start hacking it, and I'm going to be less than happy with the story I put together, which I thought stood well on its own. So I decided to take the jump and make the investment and publish it myself, and I'm so happy I did. I designed the structure and theme of the book and the placement of the images, but I had a great layout designer who understood what I was going for, and he did a fantastic job laying out the book. One interesting story, I was trying to find a little information on Packard's published production numbers. There was a copy of it at the Library of Congress it was published in 1952. I contacted the Library of Congress, say I'm writing a book. I'd like to get a copy of this published production number document from Packard. And they said, "I'm sorry, sir, we've looked for it, we can't find it." I said, "You're the Library of Congress. You're going to lose documents?" And it turns out I didn't hear back from them for a couple months. And then the guy called me and says, "I'm so sorry, we found it. It was just sitting on somebody's desk somewhere." I was like, wow. So I thought that was kind of a funny story. Another interesting story with the Library of Congress, I'm happy that there's actually a copy of my book in the Library of Congress. I found that pretty proud of that. I didn't want my book to be written with regrets, so I tried to make sure my research was as exhaustive as possible. I have almost 700 endnotes in my book, and one of the interesting stories of working with my editor, that we went through those footnotes like 3 times, making sure it was accurate, double checking the references. That was like getting a root canal. That was pretty awful. Here's a DV32 Stutz. Talk a little bit about the images and the photographers. This is an image taken by Bill Pack, a photographer. What was great about Bill is what the image you see here was taken in a garage, and there was a bunch of cars around it, probably no more than 8 feet away from this car. So I still don't know how the hell he pulls it off, but it looks like, when you see it in the book, it looks like a studio photo. But that's just his thing. He brings out this big box that flashes lights at the right time, and he takes a picture and he can edit out stuff behind it. He was great to work with, and he did a great job, which this is one of the featured cars in my book. It's a DV32, it's a LeBaron design when Ralph Roberts would have been at LeBaron. One of the other things about the images, finding good images that were fresh for the book was as much of a challenge for me as writing a story. Because, you guys are probably guys, you go through and say, "Oh, I've seen that picture before." So I really stressed finding images, especially the period images in my book, that I don't think people have seen this. This will be fresh and still supports the story. And one of the things about the book, there's almost no people in the book, in the images. Almost. There's a few, but I really wanted the only images of people to be the people, the subject of the book, and all the images, whether advertisements, period images, or modern images, I didn't want any people be shown in, because I wanted to focus on the car itself and the design. Just another image of my book from Kimball stock. This is this one won Best to Show, 34 Dietrich Convertible Victoria. This one Best to Show at Pebble in 2013. That was actually my first year of judging at Pebble in the Packard Open class. So it was interesting. The first car that our team judged when I was there won Best to Show. Of course, everyone wants to know about Jay. Jay Leno wrote the foreword to my book, and I'm sure, not telling anybody here anything they don't know. Great guy, very friendly. He was my first choice to write a foreword because, as all of you know, he is actually a student of automotive history. He's a real car guy, and he was my first choice. And he wrote a really great foreword to my book, which was really perfect for my book. Couldn't have been a nicer guy. He seems as nice, and I'm sure some of you met him. He's as nice as you see on TV. Really just a legitimate guy. Okay, so I want to end my talk here briefly, not necessarily car related, but you'll find this an interesting story. You're visiting this illustration 61. Again, this is the picture of the backside of 2 Columbus Circle where LeBaron was. You probably ask, well, why are you seeing this again? When I was looking for more photos of 2 Columbus Circle to kind of get more history of the early days of LeBaron, I reached out to a gentleman who had a large portion of Irving Browning photos. And I found out this Irving Browning guy had tons of city-life pictures of in the 20s and 30s in New York City. What happened was this guy's name was Ira Meistrich that I reached out to. And I said, hey, I'm looking for maybe a better negative of this. Maybe I can blow up in the window. Maybe I could see, a crazy talk. Can I see Ray Dietrich in the window? Blah, blah, blah. But, I was just trying to take it to the nth degree. And basically, when I got a hold of him, he says, I don't have this image, but by the way, I've been trying to find a home for these 5,000 Irving Browning photos for 30 years, and I'm done. They're going in the trash next week. So when I heard that, because you see these images, just incredible, the golden age of New York, and you see cars, right? So I said, don't do that, please. Give me 30 days. Let me see if I can find a home for this. And he was so downtrodden because no, I've looked for 30 years. Nobody finds the room. Nobody wants them. I said, I wrote a book. I have tenacity. Give me 30 days. So I said, to sweeten the deal, I'm going to pay your rent on your storage for 30 days, so you have nothing to lose. So I ended up sending this complete stranger a check to buy his storage for 30 days, to buy me time to see if I could find a home for these great images, because I said, this is great history. You can't throw this stuff in the trash. So it was quite interesting, because this was going on during the pandemic. So I'm reaching out to museums, they're closed, skeleton crews, right? There's nobody there, and I just wasn't making any progress. And I was starting to run out of time. And then I talked to a friend from the Packard Club, George Beck, who worked at Blackhawk. I said, hey, you think Blackhawk would be interested in these photos? And we kind of came to the conclusion they wouldn't, but he came up with an idea. He says, have you looked for any government libraries? Maybe they would be interested. And I thought, okay, yeah, maybe that's a good idea. And then I thought, what's the New York State Library? Maybe I'll reach out to them. And I ended up doing that. It was less than a week left to go for the 30 days up. We ended up getting an email, Ira and myself, from the curator saying, we will take the images. We love them. Wow. And Ira, for 30 years of frustration, he cried. Yeah. So, it's, yeah. So I just wanted to mention that story because it's just a crazy story. If I didn't write the book when I did and contact him when I did, all these images, and they were featured at the New York State which I'll show briefly here, a couple of them, in some exhibitions, and they were very popular events. People were asking, where's the Irving Browning collection? Makes me feel pretty proud. Those helped save us. And just quickly, here was the exhibition. You see in the back, Ira's in the middle with people from around the country that were big Irving Browning fans of his photos. And that's when they were doing the exhibition. Just a quick example, here's the New York State Museum. I think this is a 27 actual taxi cab. This is actually an Irving Browning image they blew up, huge, right? Which was 1927. So there's 27 taxi in this image. And if you look, the light pole that's in the image actually ended up being, that's a 27, at least that era light pole in New York City. And here's just one example. Here's the Chrysler Building. Irving Browning was contracted to take images of the construction of the Empire State Building and the Chrysler Building. And here's this crazy brand new picture of the Chrysler Building before all the high-rises went around it. It's such a cool picture. Maybe the moral of the story is old cars can save the world. Getting back to my book, happy to mention that I won multiple awards with my book. Independent Book Publishers Association 23 Gold Awards for Best Transportation, Best Coffee Book from the National Indie Excellence Award. And then obviously the one I'm most proud of, the most prestigious, I won the 2023 Nicholas Joseph Cugno Award from the Society of Automotive Historians for my book. When I wrote my book, I was just looking to write a book that car people like you would appreciate. But when I started getting recognized, my book for non-car people, they felt it was just a good book. It was more than I imagined. I was just, hoping that car people would enjoy my book. And when outside the car world started to recognize it, it was great. So, I am working on another book, and it's on reverse psychology. Please don't buy the book. And with that, I thank you. Yeah, so I did bring some books for sale if anybody has any interest. $65. I do take card unless you have exact cash almost. Brought a few books. If anybody has interest, I'll be hanging around. If anybody has interest in buying a book, and I can sign it for you.
Thank you.
And with that, the only other thing is questions. I'll take some questions that maybe you have about me or the book or what have you.
How long was the process from concept to publish?
It was insane. It was, and people that wrote books says you couldn't have done it, and I said I did it. It was a year and a half, which, and to be fair, there was a pandemic going on, so I did have a little more time because work was kind of slow. But even then, they said you couldn't have pulled it off in a year, and I said I did. I was, I had my regular job. During the week, I'd be staying up till 2 or 3 in the morning writing the book. And it was just, I just said, I gotta get this done. Because I worried, kind of like an old car, if I lose momentum, I'm gonna end up abandoning it. And 10, 15 years later, I'm gonna go, geez, I wish I had finished that book. So I just kind of persevered, says, I'm gonna just make this happen and get it completed, and that's what I did.
So you wrote it during the pandemic. Would you let us know when you're gonna write the next one so we can avoid the pandemic?
Yeah. I do have an idea for a book. Originally I was going to write a book on Packard because I discovered quite a bit of information on Packard that I don't think it's really not well known. But then I got sidetracked because I started doing history of Dietrich and started about Tom Hibbert. There's all this material on Tom Hibbert that I never read before. And I kind of got diverted to write this story about the history of stylists early, and the Packard book kind of got put in the back burner. I hope to revisit that sometime in the future because I think it would be a good book too. So.
I was wondering, how much hands-on knowledge did a lot of these artists that were basically designers have? Did they actually bend metal, or did they know a lot of the skill sets necessary when they design, or is it just taken form?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I would say Ray Dietrich was a little unique in that respect because of his education and experience. He was more hands-on, where a lot of some of these designers early on, Ray Dietrich called them skin artists, right? Oh, these are beautiful designs, but we can't build this. It's not practical. You don't understand. You know, the metal doesn't bend that way. Blah blah blah. So it was probably rare for somebody like Ray Dietrich who had that hands-on, especially early on. There's probably a lot more skin artists.
A
Yeah.
lot of the European designers, they all were in the shop, you know, making stuff with their grandfather. And then they got
Yeah.
So I was looking at Detroit steel artists,
Yeah.
you know, about.
I know Ray Dietrich talked about they didn't have the talent in Detroit when Edsel Ford brought him there. So he ended up going to the East Coast and all the custom coach builders stealing talent to bring them out to Detroit, giving them good jobs, and use them to train, you know, maybe more lower level people that are already in Detroit to you know, to build fenders and build bodies and do the woodblock and all that stuff. So yeah, you know, like Tom Hibbert was kind of like that. He kind of had that base experience, kind of like Ray Dietrich. Ralph Roberts, no, he was, you know, Ivy League graduate. He just learned because it was baptism by fire because Ray Dietrich left and there was nobody else going to LeBaron back in 25. He had no choice. He ended up being a pretty good, you know, designer. He had a good sense of taste. I think some of the cars you see coming out of LeBaron were, you know, the early 30s, for example, right? Like Harley Earl he wasn't really a designer. He was kind of more of a stylist, kind of got the big picture in mind, a little bit like Howard Barron. But they weren't designers, but they did have a good sense of taste. Yeah.
So I get into the real esoteric stuff.
Do you have anything to say about the engines on these cars? I know that wasn't your book, but what kind of engines do these cars
What
have?
kind of engines?
Yeah.
Well, like this one, this is a V12 motor in here.
12, yeah.
V12. Most of these are V12. These are the, you know, the higher end car, at least on Packard, right? V12 motors. They did do some Super 8s, 8-cylinder motors for these custom, semi-custom. This is more of a semi-custom.
V16s, with any V16s?
4 of these.
V16s?
I'm sorry?
Somebody have a V16 in one of these?
Well, Cadillac had V16. Yeah. That wasn't really the focus of my book because that was sort of the Harley Earl, but yeah.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
And that will conclude our luncheon. Again, next month, Michael Allen